What if I told you that almost every war of the last 200 years has the same root cause? Not money, not religion, not even power. It's something far more invisible and far more dangerous. It's an idea. And once this idea was born in the late 1700s, it spread like wildfire across the entire world, toppling empires, redrawing maps, and creating the very countries we live in today. That idea, nationalism. And today, we're going back to where it all started. Before we dive in, let's get one thing straight. What even is nationalism? Now today, the word gets a bad reputation, and we'll talk about why later. But in the 19th century, nationalism was actually a revolutionary idea. It basically said this: people who share the same language, culture, and history, they belong together. They deserve their own state, their own government, their own destiny. Sounds simple, right? But in a world ruled by massive multi-ethnic empires, the Ottoman Empire, the Habsburg Empire, the Russian Empire, this was radical, dangerous even. Because here's what empires were built on: loyalty to a king or emperor, not to a people. A peasant in what is now Hungary might be ruled by an Austrian emperor who spoke German and had never visited their village. A Greek farmer might be paying taxes to a Turkish sultan hundreds of miles away. Nationalism said that's wrong, and it was ready to fight about it. So, where did this idea come from? Well, buckle up, because it starts with the most chaotic event in modern history. The French Revolution of 1789 is usually talked about in terms of liberty, equality, and a lot of beheadings. But what often gets overlooked is what it did to the concept of nationhood. Before the revolution, France wasn't really a nation in the modern sense. It was a kingdom. The king owned it. The people were his subjects, not citizens. Then suddenly, the revolution flipped the script. It said, the people are the nation, not the king, not the church, the people. And the French people, united by language, culture, and now a shared political identity, became a force unlike anything Europe had seen. And then came Napoleon. Now look, Napoleon is complicated. He was many things: military genius, dictator, legal reformer, and unwitting advertiser for nationalism. Here's what I mean. When Napoleon's armies marched across Europe, into Spain, into Prussia, into Italy, they didn't just conquer territory. They spread ideas. The idea of the nation-state. The idea that a people could govern themselves. The idea that you didn't have to bow to some emperor who didn't speak your language. And here's the twist. By conquering these people, Napoleon actually awakened them. In Spain, resistance to French occupation became the first real spark of Spanish national identity. In Germany, defeat by France lit a fire under German intellectuals who asked, "Why are we divided? Why aren't we one people?" Napoleon thought he was building an empire. Instead, he planted the seeds of the world that would eventually destroy empires, including his own. Now, you can't understand nationalism without understanding Romanticism. And no, I'm not talking about candlelit dinners. Romanticism was an artistic and intellectual movement that swept Europe in the late 1700s and early 1800s. It was a reaction against cold, rational Enlightenment thinking. Romantics celebrated emotion, nature, folklore, and, critically, the unique identity of peoples. German intellectuals like Johann Gottfried Herder argued that every nation had a unique Volksgeist, a national spirit, expressed through its language, music, poetry, and traditions. He said, "Your language isn't just how you communicate, it's how you think. it's who you are. This had massive consequences. Suddenly, intellectuals across Europe were running around collecting folk songs, writing down old legends, reviving dying languages. The Brothers Grimm in Germany, yes, the fairy tale guys, were actually doing nationalist work. By collecting German folk stories, they were building a shared German cultural identity. In Hungary, poets were writing passionate odes to Magyar identity. In Greece, scholars were reviving ancient Greek as a symbol of national pride. In Italy, composers like Verdi were writing operas so politically charged that Va Pensiero, a chorus of Hebrew slaves longing for their homeland, became a secret anthem for Italian unification. The audience wept. The censors panicked. The revolution was being written in music. The Romantics didn't just describe nations, they invented them, and the people believed it. All right, let's talk about where nationalism got real. Germany. In 1815, Germany didn't exist. What existed was a patchwork of 39 separate states, kingdoms, duchies, free cities, loosely connected in something called the German Confederation. They spoke the same language, they shared a culture, but politically, total chaos. Enter Otto von Bismarck, Prussian statesman, political genius, and possibly the most cold-blooded pragmatist in the history of European politics. Bismarck famously said that the great questions of the day would not be solved by speeches and majority decisions, but by iron and blood, and he meant it. His strategy was calculated and ruthless. He engineered 3 wars in just 7 years. First against Denmark in 1864, then against Austria in 1866, in a war so short and decisive it was called the 7 Weeks' War. And finally, against France in 1870, a war he actually manipulated France into starting by editing a telegram to make it look like the French ambassador had insulted the Prussian king. The Franco-Prussian War was a disaster for France. Paris was besieged. Napoleon III was captured. And in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, in the heart of French power, the German Empire was proclaimed in January 1871. Bismarck had done it. Through war, manipulation, and sheer political will, he had unified Germany, not through the idealism of the Romantics, through realpolitik. It was a lesson the 20th century would learn, sometimes too well. If German unification was cold and calculated, Italian unification was its romantic, chaotic, passionate opposite. Italy in 1815 was, like Germany, a fragmented mess. Austrian-controlled territories in the north, a bunch of small kingdoms in the middle, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies in the south, and the Papal States cutting the peninsula in half. The movement to unite Italy was called the Risorgimento, the Resurgence, and it had 3 very different heroes. There was Cavour, the cunning diplomat, the Italian Bismarck, who played France against Austria to win territory through politics. There was Mazzini, the idealist, the writer, the revolutionary who believed Italian unification was a moral mission, that Italy was destined by God to lead the world into a new era of free nations. And then there was Garibaldi. And honestly, Garibaldi deserves his own movie. Giuseppe Garibaldi was basically the most swashbuckling figure in 19th century history. A revolutionary who had fought in South America, been exiled twice, and came back to lead his famous Miller, the Thousand, a volunteer army in red shirts who landed in Sicily in 1860 with nothing but passion and rifles. They shouldn't have won. They did anyway. Garibaldi swept through the south and handed the entire kingdom of the Two Sicilies to the Piedmontese king on a silver platter, saying essentially, Here, I conquered half of Italy for you. You're welcome. By 1871, Italy was unified. After centuries of division, there was finally an Italian state. The dream the Romantics had written poems about was real. But then, and this is important, the dream came with complications. The new Italy was deeply unequal. The North and South were worlds apart, and many Italians, especially in the South, asked, is this really what we fought for? Nationalism had delivered a country. It hadn't delivered a perfect one. Here's where things get serious. The same nationalist energy that built Germany and Italy was destroying the old empires from the inside. The Ottoman Empire, once so powerful it had threatened to conquer Vienna, was now called the sick man of Europe. Greece had broken free in 1821. Bulgaria, Serbia, Romania were all pushing for independence. Every nationalist movement in the Balkans was another wound in the Ottoman body. The Habsburg Empire, Austria-Hungary, was a patchwork of over a dozen ethnic groups: Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Croats, Serbs, Romanians, all demanding recognition, all demanding nationhood. The empire tried to manage this through compromise, the famous 1867 Ausgleich that gave Hungarians equal status, but it was a band-aid on a gaping wound. Because here's the brutal truth about nationalism: it doesn't stop. Once the idea spreads that your people deserve a nation, nothing short of a nation will satisfy you. And when you have 14 different peoples with 14 different ideas of what their nation should look like, all living in the same empire, the math doesn't work. By 1914, the tensions built up over a century of nationalist movements exploded in Sarajevo. One assassination, one Bosnian Serb nationalist, one Austrian archduke, and the fuse that nationalism had been quietly laying for 100 years finally ignited. So, what do we take from all of this? 19th century nationalism gave the world something genuinely powerful: the idea that people have the right to determine their own fate, that your culture, language, and identity matter, that you're not just a subject, you're a citizen of a nation. That's a beautiful idea, and it created real countries, real democracies, real identities that billions of people are proud of today. But it also planted seeds that produced the deadliest wars in human history, because nationalism, taken to its extreme, stops saying we deserve our own country and starts saying our country deserves to be greater than yours. It slides from pride into exclusion, from identity into hatred. The 19th century showed us both faces, and the reason we study this isn't just to know what happened. It's because nationalism never went away. It's still shaping elections, borders, conflicts, and identities right now, in 2025 and beyond. Understanding where it came from is the first step to understanding the world we live in. And that is why history matters. All right, that's a wrap on the Age of Nationalism. From the French Revolution to Bismarck's Iron and Blood, from Garibaldi's red shirts to the cracks in the old empires. If you made it this far, genuinely thank you. This is the kind of history that still matters, and I love sharing it with you. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. It seriously helps the channel more than you know. And if you want more deep dives like this, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next. Drop a comment below. Which figure from this video do you think shaped history the most? Bismarck, Garibaldi, Napoleon? I want to hear your take. Until next time, keep the past unlocked. See you in the next one.